There's one advantage of being small like this, and that is that we can turn this more into a good exchange and learning experience, I think, when it's a smaller group like this. So, and I know Enoch well enough to know you won't mind that at all, right, Enoch? So at any point, is that okay if we say, any point at all, ask for clarifications, let's see if we can't have some interaction, because we can when we're in a more intimate setting like this. It really is a pleasure in my job to rub shoulders and work with some really amazing, really great individuals. And in fact, some of you here are those individuals, not just Enoch, but Enoch, I don't know, we've known each other for 3-4 years, probably 4 or 5 years, something like that. The one thing that I just want to in general say is that Enoch is one of the most insightful people I know. He's very fun to engage in conversations. He thinks about a lot of things, and he thinks deeply about a lot of things. And I was really happy to see Carrie, his wife, and he got together, and it was really a joy for me to see, two people that I really related to well, and that to be together. And they ended up going on a field study to India, and you were just saying it was in 2003, right? And Enoch took an interest in the Tibetan community, but I think also in general in agriculture and the environment and ecology and a number of those issues. And Enoch ties, he's very good at this, and this is something that we all could do better, tie things into our world paradigm, tie things into, integrate information and ideas into how we feel about the world, instead of just sort of storing a bunch of facts in our heads. And so I think hopefully he'll spend some time and talk to us, or at least I'm not sure what he has in mind for his presentation here, but talk to us some about some of his thoughts on agriculture. He returned. He's now out at Cornell. He's on a little bit of a leave right now, working down in Sanpete County. But he's in an MPA program out at Cornell, and returned last year to India. Was it last year? Year before?
I was there on New Year's Eve. And then
okay, kind of the crossover. And he was able to go back and visit the village where he spent time the first time, and that. But he was looking with the Cornell group more at general agricultural principles and that. So with that, we'll turn the time over to Enoch.
Well, thanks, Dave. It's good to be here. It's good to see some people that I know in the audience. And I'm actually pretty glad that this is more of an intimate setting, and I really encourage you to get involved if you'd like and ask me a bunch of questions. I sort of have this jumble in my mind of like all these things I want to say, but save me the trouble of having to straighten it all out, and go ahead and ask me some questions. I'll talk a little bit about agriculture like Dave said, but I hope also to give you a general sense of what I took home from my field trip to India, where it's led me in my life, and sort of why I think that things like field study, the BYU's field study program is a really excellent program with whatever country you go to, and why I think it's important to have experiences like it. So I think I'm going to start with a picture. Let's see if I can get this to work. Can you guys see that all right? Maybe we can turn these lights off. Okay. So this building is called the Gateway of India. And it obviously looks like Indian architecture. It's actually Muslim Indian influence, and looks like it could be really old. In fact, it's less than 100 years old. It was built in 1914, I think it was, by the British to commemorate the coming of King George to India a few years before. And they call it the Gateway of India. So we sort of think of globalization as this, new, it's a new word in the last several years, and there's tons and tons of books out about it now. Well, I think that this, both then and today, I'm going to show you a picture a little later that contextualizes this building more, but yeah, the Gateway of India, I think, is a prime example of how globalization has been going on for a long time. This was built by the British, and yet it's Indian architecture. It's a beautiful building. It's very large. You can see people down there at the bottom to give you a little bit more of a sense of how big it is. And I'm sort of going to be using this building as an idea of a gateway, as a symbol, a metaphor in my talk today. Maybe I could have given my talk like a cheesy title like Gateway to India, Gateway to the World or something, but I hope it's not too cheesy. I want to tell you a story of when an experience I had there right outside it in January when I was in India, and and that's sort of like where the title of my talk comes from. It's called Patriotism in Another Land, and my talk really has very little to do with patriotism, but it segues off this story where I experienced an Indian's patriotism near this gateway, and so I'd like to talk about that a little bit. This next slide is going to be kind of like a bird's eye view of the gateway and the buildings around it. And the Gateway of India is actually, sorry I neglected to mention this, it's actually on the harbor in Bombay. Bombay is now called Mumbai. And just as it was a great example of globalization nearly a century ago, today, so right there it is. It's on the bay, and these buildings right here, the Taj Residency Hotel was actually built by a guy named Tata, a Farsi, and the Farsis are descendants of Persian Zoroastrians that immigrated to India hundreds of years ago. But the guy who built this is the creator of probably the largest industrial empire in India. You see the word Tata on vehicles all over India, and but the gateway itself is still kind of a gateway to India today. It's kind of like the focal point of tourist culture in India. And this is a hotel. Both of these are hotels. And behind it, over in this area, and all along here, is kind of like the tourist central in Bombay. And then the gateway itself, all these boats right here take tourists out on the bay to see Bombay, but they also take them out to Elephanta Island, a few miles off the coast, where there are these gorgeous and beautiful sculptures carved into caves there, and it's just spectacular. But you've got everything around here. Just over in here, there's all kinds of restaurants and places to buy Indian souvenirs. You've got the most expensive hotel in India. And then right along here, where a lot of the tourists come, there's taxis and travel agencies and all kinds of people trying to get you to buy their tour of Bombay, and they have outdoor music festivals and all kinds of things here. The night in question that I want to talk about, well, first let me give it a little more context. So this cheesy metaphor idea I have of the gateway, it's kind of like to talk about what I think I got out of my experience in the field study program. Are kind of like gateway experiences that really open up a whole new world for you in another culture, that really kind of like almost initiate you into that culture, and all of a sudden you gain this huge insight into the culture. And I wanted to contrast it with the idea with what you get from, say, the usual general academic world and going to college and university. So, and the way I think about it, I was talking to my friend on the way up here, on the drive up here from San Pete. By the way, like, Dave, if you want me to sell this, like, look where I am now. I'm making $7 an hour working in San Pete County, building a building. I don't know if that... No, but actually, I'm working on a straw bale building for a nonprofit agency, and if any of you are interested in that sort of thing, we need some volunteers at some point. So talk to me afterwards. Anyway, the academic view of things, or you can talk to this guy that just came in. He's my boss. I was putting in a plug for the ranch, Eric. Anyway. So this academic sort of bird's eye view of the world, where you sort of, and I'm going to illustrate this in a second, but where you sort of see everything from afar and you see the big picture, and that's very useful, like so much comes out of the academic world, but I don't think it's complete. I think that gateway experiences that you can only get by getting down from your peak, from the bird's eye point of view, from the academic world where you're looking at textbooks and pictures like this, and actually going and doing and just letting yourself go and talking to people and meeting people and just, being open. These are the type of gateway experiences that give us an insight and knowledge that are just impossible, I think, in a purely academic setting. And I'll illustrate with my example of patriotism. From the academic standpoint, you hear in the news and in the academic world and so forth about nationalism as this new phenomenon with the rise of the modern nation state. And, when we talk about our own country, it's called patriotism, right? But when it's a foreign country, it's nationalism, and it's threatening to tear apart our world. And it's often mixed with religious strife and fundamentalism and all those sorts of things. And so when I was here in January, at the end of my stay, I was there for about a month in January. And before, when I went on the field study, I had been there for maybe 2.5 months. So this was just when I was right about to leave India, and I had spent a lot of time there. And during that time, in all the time that I had spent there, I had a lot of experiences where Indians come up to me, and Indians are really gregarious and really fun and want to talk, and they'll just come up to foreigners and just start talking and asking you about your country, and and so many Indians, talk about, how great America is and how they'd love to go and see it. And you often get the sense that, they'd really like to move there and gain all the advantages that we have. And so, patriotism in India wasn't something that I really connected up until that point of all the time that I had been there. But then on one of the last nights I was there, there was this free concert going on, and just on the lawn here, I think it was set up here, and there were chairs all through here, and I was sitting kind of back here, and not actually in the concert, but just kind of wandering around, and I ran into a young man, probably my age or a little younger. His name escapes me right now. I have it written down in a notebook that I don't have out here with me, but turns out he was a naval officer. And when he came up to me at first, it was kind of like my encounter with lots of other Indians. That is, he was talking to me about, oh, you're from America. America's so cool. I want to go see it, and asking me all these different questions about it. And so at one point I finally just asked him, so what do you think? Would you like to move to America one day? And he was like, no. He was like, I like to hear about it, and maybe I'd like to visit it one day, but I love my country. And he said it was such like purity and like gusto and hope, and none of this I'm trying to compare it to my own experience with patriotism in America, and I wouldn't say that I've really had too much positive experience. It seems to me like patriotism is so politicized in this country. You're only a true patriot if you support the troops, or you're only a true patriot if you speak out against the war. And, it seems like patriotism always has these political undertones to it, and expressions of them do here. But what he talked to me about, and about his love for his country, was something I don't think I'd ever seen before in America or anywhere. And it was just like, he was so filled with hope for his country. He wasn't filled with like here in America, we think we've made it, and patriotism is about defending our way of life. And for him, his patriotism was about, hope for the future for India, and about how much he just loved his country. And it was just the purest thing that I had ever experienced in terms of patriotism with someone. And in that moment, when I was talking to him, we ended up going into the concert together and sat down for a while, and then he eventually had to leave. But that was one of those experiences that opened my eyes to what something like patriotism could really be in another country, and how different that personal experience was from all the debates that I had ever heard about nationalism and religious strife and all that jazz. It blew me away, and it gave me an insight into Indian culture and this other person that was just amazing. And so that's sort of my lead example of what I've been calling a gateway experience, that the field study to India and my subsequent experience with it gave to me, and that I don't think you can get from the purely academic setting. So again, feel free to jump in at any point. Yeah.
I have a quick one. I'm trying to sort out. I sense what you're talking about with you had with this young man who was significantly different. I'm trying to figure out what it is that's different. would you say that was his patriotism an inclusive patriotism, where what you were describing that sometimes happen here is one of exclusion? In other words, it creates us and them. It creates our patriotism would be more keeping the distinction between Americans and the rest of the world, whereas his was just focused on his country, his people rising up. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I didn't sense any antagonism in his enthusiasm at all, and you know, he just all I sensed was just love for his people and his place, and the hope that he could contribute to it to make it better, you know. So I'd like to maybe describe some other similar experiences, what you might call a gateway experience that I had in India. And I just have this map up here so I can show you where I went. As Dave said, I went in 2003 with my wife, Carrie, and we went a few weeks later than the rest of the group. And in the India field study, oh, here's Coimbatore. Okay, it's right outside the city. I don't know if you can read the name, but it's called Coimbatore. And this is where the field study group generally goes and spends a bunch of time before they begin traveling around India. And Carrie and I flew into New Delhi to meet up with a friend, Blaine Johnson. I don't know if any of you guys, if he's still known. He's just a legend, yeah. Anyway, so from New Delhi, we went up to Dharamsala, which is right around there. And Dharamsala is where the seat of the Tibetan government in exile is, and there's a large Tibetan community there. There's also a large tourist culture there as well. You can imagine the sort of Western idealizations of Tibet and stuff like that. And I'll get to Tibetan culture in just a minute, but we went from there to Amritsar, and that in Amritsar is in the Punjab region where most of the Sikhs in India are. And if you don't know what Sikhism is, it's kind of like a religion that grew out of the confluence of Hinduism and Islam, and is kind of like a combination of the two. I'm sure if a Sikh were here, he'd give a much better description, but that's kind of how I think about it. Anyway, in Amritsar, there's what's called their golden temple, and it's their most sacred place, and it's this beautiful temple that's like covered in gold, and it's surrounded by a pool of water, and then another outside sort of rectangular courtyard, and they let everyone that's coming to see it stay there for free or next to nothing. They have little what you might call a hostel type places for the Sikhs and anyone else, foreigners, and they allow foreigners to go in and to go into the precincts of the temple. And you have to take your shoes off before you walk around there. But that was another place. I don't have time to go into it all, but my experience there with the people and their hospitality was tremendous. I don't think I've ever felt so welcomed by a people that I didn't know than there in Amritsar. And I had lots of experiences there that were just really opened my eyes. But one of the experiences I'd like to talk about actually happened on the way from Amritsar back to New Delhi. We were going to take a train from Amritsar to New Delhi, and we got to the station, and we got into our car, And there are these little compartments, and on each side there are beds and seats that you can sit on. And Carrie and I was helping, so I put down my bag, and I turned around to help Carrie put her stuff up on the one of the beds, and I turned around and my bag was gone. And nobody around said anything. Nobody would give me a hint of what happened. And I ran all over the place looking for someone with my bag and couldn't find anything. And it had my plane tickets and everything in it. And the train was just like starting up to go. And it was just like, man, I couldn't sleep that night on the train. It was like the worst feeling. But when we got to New Delhi, like we didn't know what to do. Like I had so much valuable stuff. I figured, hey, like, go to the police and see if anything could be done about it. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I didn't even take it on the train. Maybe I left it in the station. Let's go talk to the police or the station manager about it. And this was definitely a gateway experience, trying to talk to the police and the station manager and everything. I spent hours trying to talk to the station manager, and he claimed to be able to do something, and then like eventually he just sent me over to the police station. And man, there was like a 2-hour line at the police station, people butting in line and the police not doing anything, just and like, so like I was just upset at this point. I was angry. My bag was gone. I'd been waiting for hours. It was hot, middle of the summer, and so I said even when I got to talk to a policeman, I had to sit there and wait for him to do all kinds of stuff. And I was just like, you know what, forget it. I'm not going to get my bag back. And the policeman turned around and looked at me and said, what, you think us Indians aren't as good as you? You think that we can't find your bag? You just think that we're going to take your claim slip and forget about it? That's what you think, huh? And I was like, sorry. I mean, in the back of my mind, I'm just like, yeah, of course. But to him, I'm like, well, I've been waiting here for several hours. And then like, and after he said that, he turned right back around and just like ignored me for another 45 minutes. And then when I finally like was able to put in a statement and stuff, I was just like happy to get out of there. I knew I'd never find my bag. Like they were totally disorganized and everything. And I probably shouldn't have wasted all that time trying to do that, but boy, I'll tell you, it was a real experience that gave me insight into Indian culture and what they must have to go through, what life must be like to have a police force that's kind of disorganized and unable to respond. Anyway, I eventually worked things out, and we, got new plane tickets, and then took a 40-hour train ride down to here. And the village that you stay in India is great. It's just like you can't have a more real, I'm not going to dwell on it, but you can't have a more real experience. It's a rural village just outside of this. Coimbatore is a big city, but then there's a rural village just outside of it. You can get back and forth on a bus really easily, and the family you stay with is just wonderful. And they have really cute kids and everything, but I'm not going to focus on that right now. After Carrie and I went down there and stayed with them for a few weeks, we also went up to Mysore, which is somewhere around there, I think. And right near Mysore, you take a bus out, and kind of even further out in the middle of the country, there's one of the largest Tibetan settlements in India. It's called Bailakuppe, and I had heard about it, and I really wanted to go. And so we went up to Mysore, saw some sights, then took a bus there. And I don't know, there's maybe 20 to 30,000 Tibetans in this settlement, kind of spread out, and it's in this gorgeous, gorgeous area of India. I mean, a lot of India, especially down here, is kind of, I mean, over here in the town of state of Kerala, it's tropical and beautiful, but the more you get up into here, it's more kind of a little deserty and not quite as green. But this one place we went was just beautiful, and this settlement is just out in the middle of this gorgeous surroundings. And thanks to foreign contributions and help from the Indian government, they had rebuilt some of their biggest monasteries from Tibet in this settlement, the Sarajay and the Saramay monasteries, and there are thousands of monks there. And you just walk around the city and there's hundreds of monks just like, in their red robes, just wandering all over the place. And it's one of my favorite places to go in India. I went back in January, and so I have two experiences to talk about. One of them is pretty comedic, and it was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. So all the businesses there that are surround the monasteries are run by the monks, and Carrie and I were staying in a sort of guest house. They just call them guest houses there, and you can travel and stay really cheaply in India and in the Tibetan settlements. But anyway, so yeah, the monks sort of run the places, and they run a bunch of internet cafes around there, and for all the tourists that come there and want to use the internet, and the monks as well. But I'll never forget, like one night I was coming back from this farming project area that I had spent a lot of time at, and was walking towards the internet cafe, and I hear this music, right, and it sounds really familiar, and as I get closer, like, I was just shocked. Like, there's this monk just standing outside the internet cafe, and he's just booming Eminem, right? And I couldn't believe it. I was shocked, and it was so surreal. Just like this monk that knows hardly any English, and certainly doesn't understand what Eminem is saying, just like loves this music and is totally blasting it and like rocking the whole internet cafe, and it was so funny. Like, the Tibetans, these monks, I soon discovered after that, were really into rap and hip hop. Like, they would listen to it, not just Eminem, but like everyone, and it was hard to believe because they most of them didn't know hardly any English. So I don't know what they liked about it. I guess maybe they just liked the beats. But yeah, the Tibetan people. Earlier, I was saying that that the Indian people are really gregarious and really welcoming, and even it can get to be a bit much sometimes. Actually, after a while, you really, being from America, you really kind of want some solitude when you're in India, and but the Tibetan people, I mean, they're really friendly, but just to give you an idea, they sort of have more of a air of dignity about them and a sort of self-confidence that they're like, oh, you're American? Oh, good for you, sort of thing. Like, they don't pander to you as much as the Indians do, but they'll be really friendly if you try and talk to them. At least that's been my experience. But while I was there in this settlement, I went to the Well, as I was driving in, I wasn't expecting this at all, but on the ride in, I passed this sign that said Tibetan Organic Farming Project. I was just like, wow, no way. You know, I'd come out to India to look at Indian agriculture, but, you know, I didn't expect to, you know, I was going to Tibet because I was interested in or the Tibetan settlement because I was interested in Buddhism and all that jazz. But I was really excited, so I went down there one day, and the workers there introduced me to the manager, and his name is Dorji Satan, and he speaks English pretty well, and he's this incredible guy. We became fast friends. We would just like sit around and like we'd go you know, weed in the rice paddy for a minute, and then like come down and just like talk philosophy for hours like into the evening. He was just so fun and so funny, and he was really cool. So before he was the manager, the farming project wasn't a big deal, but when he came in, he started collecting data of you know of agriculture in the Tibetan settlements all around India, and he had compiled data from you know, when Tibetans first started coming into India all the way to the present, and noticed this really downward trend in their yields, and he was like, you know, it was his conviction that this was due to, you know, the fact that they were monocropping and trying to live an industrial agricultural sort of life without all the equipment needed for it, and because they couldn't afford it all, and so he decided that he was going to turn the Tibetan Farming Project into this center for promoting organic agriculture and this other technique called natural farming that he learned from a guy named Masanobu Fukuoka, he's a Japanese farmer, and he's kind of famous in this sort of organic agriculture movement for the techniques that he learned. He calls it do-nothing farming. And instead of looking for more things to do, he looks for less things to do to his fields. And anyway, Dorji was experimenting with his techniques and other organic techniques in his fields. And it was his hope that, you know, he could kind of spread these techniques and these ideas to the Tibetan people, but what was to the Tibetan farmers. But what was really great about this guy was that he wasn't just interested in you know, saving farmers or saving agriculture in India for his people in India. For him, it was a holistic thing. It was part of preserving his culture. For him, farming was a spiritual practice, and it was a way of you know, helping the Tibetan people to remember who they were and to incorporate the spiritual teachings that they had in their everyday lives. And it was funny. He would have all kinds of criticisms about the monks and how they didn't work enough and all this stuff. And yeah, we totally hit it off. And that was another experience. So in India that, in fact, when I came back, I did my paper on the field study on this guy and about trends in Tibetan agriculture, and also on Masanobu Fukuoka and his ideas. But so ever since then, I guess I'm supposed to talk a little bit about what's been happening since the field study and where it's taken me. Carrie eventually graduated from here, and I had decided to finish a program I had started at Cornell before I went on my mission for the church. And so we moved to Cornell, and Carrie eventually applied to and was admitted to Cornell's Public Affairs program, the Cornell Institute for Public Affairs. They do a Master's of Public Administration. And it's a really kind of wide open program. They have all kinds of concentrations. You can do international development, you can do U.S. policy, you can do environmental policy, you can do politics and public affairs, like just all kinds of things. And so we were both really interested in that, and I was still finishing my undergraduate work, but after Carrie had been in it for a year, I decided to apply to it as well. And and I thought that I could carry on some of the interests that I had developed here in India within that program. And so this last year, there's a course. And by the way, the Cornell Institute for Public Affairs, we call it CIPA, has had a lot of good experience with BYU folk and Mormons. So they're really open to getting more of them if you guys are interested. Let's see, where was I? Okay, so every year at Cornell, there's this international agriculture course. I think it's called International Agriculture in Developing Nations. And they meet in the fall and have a bunch of lectures on agriculture around the world, and particularly in developing nations. And then during the winter break in January, one group goes to Mexico and one group goes to India and tours a bunch of places, goes to research institutes, farms, wholesale markets, all kinds of things, and we're expected to do some research while we're there, and then come back and give a presentation and also a paper for the spring half of the course. And so in January, I mean, it's winter up here, but it's still pretty warm down here. So we do most of our stuff in southern India. So I went back there, and I actually went a few days early and went back and saw my friend Dorji again in the Tibetan settlement. And we talked about how we could, he's really interested in setting up, building a few huts out there so that both Tibetan farmers can come and stay to learn techniques, but also tourists can come to, can sort of pay and just kind of like have an experience there, a way to fund the operation. And so we were talking about ways that I could help him get that going. And then I met the rest of the group over here in Chennai, and we did a bunch of touring around. It's getting late. I'd really like to have some questions. The research I did on this trip actually has to do with the spread of genetically modified organisms and their use in agriculture, particularly BT cotton. And oh man, that's a whole nother big story. But I ended up doing my research on ways that the technology is spread, and I don't know if you guys, if any of you know anything about this, but BT cotton got released in India illegally and spread like wildfire throughout the country, and so I did a little bit of research on that, and I basically argued that against the sort of the simplistic view, I think that that the spread was due to the fact that farmers were making the most rational decision, and obviously GMOs were better than everything else, and so it just spread because farmers made the right choice, and they're the highest court of appeal when it comes to seeing, what's best for farmers. So I sort of argued, or I looked at some research that had been done there, arguing that there are other influences involved besides just pure cost-benefit analysis on the part of the farmers. And I can answer questions about that, but yeah, I'd really like to take some questions. Yes?
Field study, you just
Hold on just a second.
pick your own topic and, sorry. Oh, so for a field study, do you just pick your own topic and then you go and study it?
Yeah. There's a field study course, and I think I didn't actually take it. I kind of got special permission to go anyway. But you kind of work with the course instructor on. They kind of work with you on what's reasonable to do and what to expect. But yeah, you pretty much do what you're interested in.
So what made you choose to go to India?
My wife, Carrie.
That's a good reason. Did you have to learn Hindi?
No. Since it was a British colony, a lot of people speak very good English in India, and you can get by just fine speaking English. You can try and learn some Hindi if you'd like, but I didn't.
Okay.
Most of the area down south is not Hindi speaking.
Did you have a question?
Dorji's farm. What was he doing out there? I don't remember. Like what crops and that?
He was doing all kinds of things, kind of experimentally. He was doing rice. He was doing pigeon pea and like other types of legumes and stuff like that. They had a few cows. He was doing a few other grains, especially as part of his natural farming experiment. He was just doing a whole bunch of different. Oh, and they also have a bunch of fruit trees, like what's that stinky fruit called? Do you remember? They call it stinky fruit.
Jackfruit.
Yeah, and they were also. I think they were actually growing some teak.
Was he concerned with yields and output? Because you mentioned that it was more of a holistic approach and stuff.
Yeah, he was definitely concerned with that the farmers weren't going to be able to make a livelihood in farming, and that so many were leaving agriculture. He thought that he wanted there to be higher yields and profits, but I think that was a sort of instrumental value for the larger purpose of keeping Tibetans more connected to the land and sort of that way of life.
So I'm trying to, up in Tibet, were they coming from agriculture? Because it's too high to really farm.
No, I know. His whole thing was that if we can't have yaks and stuff, well, at least we can farm and not just, because even though they weren't like an intensive agricultural society in Tibet, they definitely weren't like, a part of the capitalist economy, and they did rely on things like yaks, and they did do a little bit of agriculture, and he thought that that if you can't have yaks, you might as well have some sort of farming. Anything else?
You going back sometime?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, one of the things that I got from going to India. See, I had been to Japan on my mission, but that didn't really give me the travel bug. But going to India, I just every few months I get anxious, and I don't want to get out of the States now. It really gave me the travel bug, and India is just so much fun to travel around in. You can do it cheaply, and it's safe and fun, and gain all types of experiences. So yeah, I hope to go back soon. Kristen. Oh wait, just say.
Sorry. I was just wondering, with regards to patriotism, then, would you say that you've gained a greater sense of patriotism for our country, for this country, or in what way did that affect your ideas of patriotism outside of the politics?
That's a good question. Yeah, like I mean, I'm a big fan of the idea that being taught by example is the best way to learn something or to teach something. And when I saw something in him that I hadn't seen before in others, you know, it sort of opened my mind and my world to a different sort of care and love for my own country and what it gives me and offers me. And so, yeah, I would say that in a certain sense, I think I gained more patriotism for my own country from, but hopefully the sort of inclusive kind that he himself had, where I sort of hope for our future rather than take a stand against others.
So what have you done to take a step toward helping our country here then? I mean, what is it that you've gained to help in your everyday life? Like, what is it that has affected your...
Kristen, man, you always give me the tough questions.
I'm just curious.
Absolutely nothing, no. I don't know. I like to think that the work I do with the boys ranch that I'm involved with down in Spring City, that's a big source of fulfillment for me, and the ideals that we try to teach the youth that come to the ranch there in the summers, I feel like is my way of trying to contribute to a way of life that I hope gets preserved and that I think is really valuable to our country.